Alexa, play Fighting Soy Boy by Hot Dad.
This is Hot Dad from Spotify.
Play Fighting Soy Boy.
Sitting Sideways by Slim Thug on Amazon Music.
Alexa, stop. ESPN. YouTube.
Oh my god.
He has been a YouTuber for 16 years, but he only found success about 3 years ago when he started doing mukbang videos, and he gained 450 pounds in a year doing that. He says, welcome to my home, thank you for doing this interview. Yeah, I'll tell him. So basically, Mickey eats 7 meals, 7 small snack meals a day. Huh? 7 small meals a day, 7 snacks a day, and then 19 full meals. And all these are from You okay? Sometimes he has so much trouble breathing because there's food that just gets trapped in his throat and kind of collapses. So I've several times have to get like a turkey baster and put it down and go like this to get the food.
sometimes even the stuffiest of car companies can let their hair down, knock back a few, and produce a truly insane concept car that you and I know that they would never have the stones to actually produce. But on today's Idealist, we're bringing you 12 of the wildest concepts that we wish they would have actually made. Stay tuned.
Bitch.
Today, we're going to start off with a car that's luxurious to a fault, but just might actually represent the future of ultra-rich transportation. It's from Aston Martin, and it's called the Laguna Vision. To be honest, the Vision is the least familiar car on the list. Well, you don't drive it.
That's you.
So instead, there are 4 incredible seats that face each other, and space-age, private jet-like dressings to keep you comfortable as you rocket through town, thanks to the giant electric motors powered by solid-state batteries. Since a lot of the tech on display in this car doesn't actually exist on a very big scale yet, the Vision is just that, a vision of the future. But Aston has said that the Laguna design language will absolutely influence their upcoming cars. Now, the Vision might be inspired by private jets, but our next car is inspired by fighter jets instead. And, oh yeah, it's powered by an actual jet engine. Ladies and gentlemen, from the 1950s, the General Motors Firebird 2.
Oh, sick.
Not to be confused with the Pontiac Firebird, which is a fancy Camaro.
Likes that play comedy radio on Amazon.
4 unique concept cars that GM made.
The station's stand-up comedy
let's take
on
a look.
Amazon
The
Music.
Firebird 1 reminds me of Chuck Yeager's
Thank you
jet.
for being here tonight, by the way.
The 2, though, is the one that I like best. Powered by a 200 horsepower turbine engine. It's the only 4-seater of the bunch, and get this, it's made entirely
Let me give him
by
something.
titanium. Talk about space age. Bringing it back down to Earth. What do you get when you make a video game with a French car company known for making one of the simplest cars ever? You go from the 2 horsepower 2CV to the 646 horsepower GT by Citroën. Citroën. Now, those of us here in the States aren't too familiar with Citroën, but in the rest of the world, they're known for incredibly simple and incredibly cheap cars. Which is why it's a bit crazy that they partnered with Polyphony Digital, a racing sim company, to create this truly stunning piece of art. In the video game Gran Turismo, the GT was supposed to have nearly 800 horses and be all electric. The real-life version is actually way cooler, since it has 5.4-liter Ford V8 instead. Giving it performance figures really very similar to the infamous Ford GT. Unfortunately, just like so many of the other cars on this list, it was deemed too expensive to produce, and only a handful were ever built. Although, in terms of expensive to produce, they have nothing on this next car. Yeah, a Ford concept car from 1957, powered by a nuclear friggin' reactor. It must have been something in the water during the late 50s, because both GM and Chrysler were making turbine-powered cars, like the Firebird we talked about earlier. And Ford was going complete mad science and experimenting with nuclear power. The Nucleon, which, first off, that is an amazing name, had a small nuclear reactor in the back, similar to the kinds found in submarines. Ultimately, though, nuclear technology wasn't, and still quite isn't advanced enough to make the Nucleon a reality. Maybe I could suggest a nice 12-cylinder instead, like the one in the VW W12 Synchro. That's right, even before it was fashionable to call Lamborghini a fancy Volkswagen, VW was toying with the idea of making a W12 supercar. The Synchro, named after the all-wheel drive system, has been teased multiple times, and each time it had more horsepower, starting with a mere 400 horsepower in the 90s, all the way to the monster Nardo edition that in 2001 had 600 horses and could go over 200 miles an hour. They never built one for real. Instead, we got the Phaeton. Maybe a 600 horsepower W12 wasn't enough. Maybe they should have pulled a Cadillac and made a 1,000 horsepower P16 instead, which, is a real thing that Cadillac did in 2003 with the creatively named Cadillac 16. So what they did is take the already amazing LS engine and double it for a 13.5-liter 16-cylinder motor. But don't worry, it has fuel-saving technology baked right in. And holy crap, I was gonna make a joke, but it actually got 16 miles per gallon. That's better than the R8, and the engine is literally twice the size. I just figured it'd be more like Jeep's amazing concept, which gets like 12 gallons per mile. It's called the Hurricane, and it's awesome. Not only does it look like something that's meant to win off-road competitions, but it was constructed with so much crazy tech that it actually won awards from Popular Science. Stuff like four-wheel steering, and a carbon fiber structure, and a skid plate that was part of that structure, saving on weight and complexity. The Wrangler on steroids is only a two-seater though, since they needed all the extra room to fit the two Hemi engines that power it. Yeah, really, two 5.7-liter Hemis, meaning the Hurricane can reach 60 in under 5 seconds. And I want one so bad. Okay, we've had a lot of weird, luxurious, and big American excess so far. So let's go over to Japan and get the JDM nerds excited with the Nissan IDX. Now, I know the new Z just dropped, and it's a retro-inspired tuner hero. But before the Retro Z, Nissan teased us with a different retro rear-wheel drive car called the IDX. Meant to be a reissue of the Datsun 510, which if you don't know, was a sports sedan known for its driving dynamics all the way back to the 60s. The IDX had a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, and it was going to compete directly with the upcoming Subaru BRZ. In short, it was going to be the new Silvia, which would have been really cool. And speaking of retro styling, while everyone's out trying to recapture that 60s style nowadays, in 1995, Chrysler went all the way back to the 30s with the Atlantic, which is probably my favorite retro design ever. Bob Lutz, yeah, the "we need a Viper now" Bob Lutz, actually sketched the design for the 4-liter straight-8 powered sports car on a napkin. Then made Tom Gale, yeah, the "I designed the Viper" Tom Gale, finished the design. The result was the Atlantic, an Art Deco masterpiece that helped pave the way for the Prowler, except with nearly 360 horsepower and even better design language. And I think we kind of got screwed with the underpowered Prowler when you realize that we could have had the Atlantic. Concept cars are great because there's just so much variety. From retro designs like the IDX and the Atlantic, all the way to bonkers future designs like the Vision and the Jaguar CX-75, which is, of course, the next car on our list. It was honestly a car that was way ahead of its time. First shown in 2010, the CX-75 made nearly 800 horsepower using a hybrid power plant. A full 3 years before the McLaren P1 was introduced, using a suspiciously similar hybrid system. Unlike their British rival, though, the Jag had an interior that looked like it was straight from a science fiction novel, with chrome, aluminum, and carbon fiber everywhere. Oh, and believe it or not, this crazy futuristic concept was actually tamed way down. Before they actually built 6 of these cars for testing, it was gonna use micro turbines to generate power, which would have allowed it to go 200 miles an hour while being better for the environment than a Toyota Prius. As we whittle down to the last few, let's take a moment to appreciate the Buick Y-Job. That's what she said. Which, I'll be the first to admit, isn't the greatest name. But it is a really important car, because when it was revealed in 1938, it was really the first concept car as we know the term today. It was just a bunch of concepts thrown on a crazy looking car. And many of those concepts still look and sound super cool. Stuff like hidden headlamps, flush door handles, and a gun sight hood order. Other things were just wild for the time, like power windows. Yeah, right before the US entered World War II, Harley J. Earl was putting power windows in cars. The coolest part is that unlike a lot of modern concept cars that are just mock-ups and can't really be used for anything, Mr. Earl continued to drive the Y-Job from around 1940 all the way to 1951. Oh, and fun fact, it's called the Y-Job because most experimental things use the letter X, And Earl wanted to one-up everyone by advancing the X alphabetically to a Y. Sorry, what was that? Or is that an honorable mention? Hell yeah, baby. And it's a Lamborghini. Introducing a car that we have definitely used as a thumbnail before, the totally insane Lamborghini Terzo Millennium. A self-healing, ultra-aerodynamic electric car that not only looks like it's visiting from the future, but it sounds like it too. If you believe Lamborghini, who have said that the focus of the Terzo Millennium is to make an electric car that has the spirit of a Lambo, including a distinctive noise that will be genre-defining. So, why did we relegate this to an honorable mention? Well, because there isn't actually any confirmation that Lamborghini won't actually sell this thing to the public. If they do, sign me up. Really, I definitely couldn't afford it, but one can dream, right? Because otherwise, I might just want a minivan.
Hey, asshole.
Yeah, you heard me right. I want a minivan. Specifically, the final car on our
The
list.
Hellcat one?
The Renault Espace F1. Renault Espace. E-Space. Espace. Before you call the wagon to take me to the mental hospital, just hear me out. 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. You see, in 1993, rally car maker that occasionally made family cars, Renault, had made huge strides in Formula One. To celebrate, they combined their family car with their Formula One car and made a mid-engine V10 winged minivan. Just check out this shot of the interior. Now, honestly, who wants to roll around in the back of this thing with me driving? Just remember to keep your fingers out of those intakes. And that concludes our list for today. Which one is your favorite? Me? I think the idealist concept that they should have made is the GT by Citroën. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, consider giving our others a watch. Like this vid here on the difference between superchargers or turbochargers. Or this one that isn't that. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Idealist. We'll see you all next time.
Yeah, bitch.
So you want a new
Yeah,
car,
bitch.
and you spend every day poring over Facebook Marketplace looking for the perfect used car with a good value and a lot of fun. And then you see it. You see that amazing car that you had no idea was so cheap, was so fast, was so luxurious. Well, before you go any further, before you buy that car, stop. Watch this video and make sure it's not one of the cars on this list. Because these are the forbidden fruits of the used car marketplace. And you are going to want nothing to do with them. What's up, viewer? I'm the Squid, this is Ideal Cars, and I'm about to run you through a bunch of cars that you definitely might see on the marketplace that you need to avoid. So go ahead and smash that subscribe button down below, turn on the little bell, and let's get into it. Oh, do you hear that? What is that sound? That sounds kind of like an F1 car screaming at you. That's right. It is the Ideal Car favorite and least favorite, the E60 M5. Now, I'm not going to lie. When I started here at Ideal Cars, we talked about this car so much that I kind of really wanted to buy one. But take it from me, once you do the research, once you talk to anyone who has owned one, you know, do not consider buying an E60 M5. And why not? Well, because that notorious S85 V10, the F1-inspired monstrosity, is notorious for failing rod bearings. What does a failing rod bearing mean to you? Well, if you own a really expensive German luxury car, it means a hell of a lot of money coming out of your wallet on the reg. That's right, nasty repair bills that will literally cost you as much money as buying the whole car again. And I don't know about you, but that does not sound like my ideal car. I know, I owned a Land Rover that was basically that. Don't do it. Now, it's not all bad news. If you are one of the lucky few to not have these problems, you definitely have my jealousy. Because you're driving around in one of the most badass cars could ever be made. But don't be fooled. As you're driving around in that car with your pedal to the metal, you are just driving straight to the mechanic shop. Because if it's not the rod bearing failing, it's going to be that throttle actuator up next. And after you fix those, well, too bad. You bought the SMG model, and guess what? You are going to quickly regret that choice because those SMGs love to explode. you should have bought the manual transmission. And you should have bought our shirt up here that is all about saving the manual transmission. Another reason you probably didn't buy the manual M5 is because they're worth tons of money over their SMG counterparts. Probably because of their known failure point. And again, I know, this is the most tempting car on the used car market today, pretty much. And why? Well, you can get this 500 horsepower F1 powered BMW sedan for around 15 grand. And if you're lucky enough to find one in the manual, you're talking about 10,000 bucks more, which might actually be worth it because you're going to go through a few of those SMG transmissions. So yes, even though these are a performance car steal, they're an absolute bargain. Thanks to the repair issues involved with the 625, go ahead and just watch YouTube videos about them instead of actually owning one. Let somebody else deal with the repair load. And that same point holds true for our next vehicle, which is, let's be honest, literally any Range Rover, or Land Rover for that matter. Do you love rental cars? Well then, maybe you actually should get a Range Rover, because you're going to get really used to driving around rental cars on the regular. Why? Well, the British aren't so great at making anything with electricity. And most of the time when you sit in one, you can kind of tell they might have been drunk when they made it, and even when they put it together. Which is a shame, because Land Rover designs are so timeless. As somebody who has owned a Land Rover for nearly a decade, I can tell you that I probably spent 8 years out of those 10 with my car in the shop or broken down or needing a part the entire time. And aside from the reliability, they're also just one of the worst depreciating cars on the road. Any Land Rover is going to lead the charts in value lost in the first 5 years, which is great for you if you're buying them used, but if you're buying one new, it's gonna hurt. And I know we're mostly talking about Range Rovers here, but I own the Land Rover Discovery, and again, these are one of the most tempting vehicles on the used market of all time. You can get them for like 3 grand, they're more capable than a Jeep, they're more luxurious than an Audi, they're fantastic, they're beautiful, and they're unreliable as f***. So, pretty much, if you're out there and you don't have deep bank accounts, just avoid the entire Land Rover lineup in general. Save yourself time, money, and keep all the hair in your head, and just avoid that at Now, next up, we're not going to talk about a car that's known for reliability issues as much, and it's not that tempting on the used market. You might be consider buying one new. We're going to be talking about the Mitsubishi Mirage. Sure, this is a fantastically cheap car, but it is also a fantastically cheap car. Let me explain. Brand new, these are around 14,000 bucks, which is insane for a new car. And fun fact, if you go to a dealership and argue with them, you can likely get these for closer to 10 grand out the door. Seriously. They're built cheap, they're engineered cheap, and they're designed to be sold cheap. What's wrong with that, though? We're Ideal Cars. We're all about cheap. Well, first of all, if you know anything about Big Daddy Doug, you know that he said that this is quite possibly the worst new car you can have. I mean, the interior is just awful. The motor is barely alive. It's so underpowered that driving it is practically a chore. So yes, while we here at Ideal Cars love cheap cars, and the Mitsubishi Mirage might be the cheapest car of all time, it's a pretty hard car to love. You're honestly way better off buying any used car for that $10,000 you would have bought that Mirage new. And if you need a suggestion of a great car to buy for under 10 grand, check out this video up here. So while the Mirage may never actually make you feel like a millionaire or even a thousandaire, this next car on our list will likely trick you into thinking that you could be part of the 1% club. But just know what you're getting into if you go down this road. Because pretty close to the price of that Mitsubishi Mirage, you could get yourself a Maserati. But trust me, you do not want to. Sure, it'll make you look rich, even though you're on a budget. But you might actually still need to be rich to own the thing. Because not only is it unreliable, it's an exotic, fancy luxury car. Which means it has exotic, fancy luxury car prices and parts to fix it. Remember, this is a Maserati. Under the hood is a Ferrari engine. Go down to Napa Auto Parts and get an alternator for it. It's going to be pricey to maintain. And what's worse is that screaming, beautiful Ferrari V8 engine is mated to a pretty crappy semi-automatic transmission, the Duo Select. It is a total nightmare to drive in city traffic because it searches around for gears. So yes, there is a Ferrari V8 packed under an exotic supercar body that looks beautiful for around 15,000 bucks. And every time you hit the gas on the highway, you are going to love the sound that thing makes. But before you consider buying one, really think about why you're buying this expensive luxury family hauler. Sure, you might be wanting to buy an everyday run-around-town flex machine. Just don't drive it every day, or even kind of go that far around town, because you're always going to want to be nearby your favorite mechanic. Because I'm pretty sure Quattroporte is Italian for 4 times as unreliable. Alright, what if you wanted all of the fun and enjoyment and sports carness of a Mazda Miata and none of the Miata reliability? Well, guess what, fans? The RX-8 is always the answer. Yes, the painfully unreliable Mazda RX-8 is an absolute delight to drive. And it's a rotary, so it loves playing and dancing up in that 9,000 RPM redline area. Meaning it's as fun to listen to as it is to drive. But it's also a rotary, and it's dreadfully unreliable. How unreliable? Mazda had to actually build a whole new factory just to make replacement RX-8 engines when they came out. Because the brand new ones typically didn't even last 80,000 miles. So if you don't want to be stuck shelling out thousands regularly for brand new motors, or learning how to fix apex seals on a Dorito, stay the hell away from the all-too-tempting Mazda RX-8, and you'll thank me in the long run. Luckily, this next car is probably a lot easier to avoid nowadays, but you should still be very aware of it. We're talking about the Ford Pinto. The original introduction of the Ford Pinto to the Ford lineup created some pretty explosive sales numbers, and really set a fire under the seats of its competition. And all was going great until Ford discovered a little problem. And that problem was with the Pinto's gas tank. You see, the engineers over at Ford decided that the gas tank should go way in the back of the car, you know, to protect it from all the damage.
When are you going to watch a movie?
The thing about is cars are regularly rear-ended, and that gas tank had basically no protection from a rear-end crash.
Wait, are they going to watch a movie?
You get a fender bender with somebody not hitting the brakes behind you, and you're suddenly
Mom, are they going to watch a movie?
Now, luckily, it's 2021.
Which one?
You don't really have to worry about finding a Ford Pinto nowadays.
The Matrix?
A lot of them have been recalled and fixed and updated and blah, blah, blah.
What?
But still, you should know what you're getting involved in if you see a really cheap Ford Pinto for sale. It may just be the last car you ever own, and I don't mean that in a good way. And look, while we're on this topic, we might as well cover just about every 70s muscle car ever made. Now, 70s muscle cars aren't bad, they're actually completely badass. But in the mid-70s, there was this little thing called an oil crisis. So the general auto market moved away from big gas-guzzling muscle cars and into, you know, smaller, lighter stuff like that Pinto, which kind of ruined the muscle car market at the time. Need a good example? Picture a Dodge Challenger back in the 70s. Big, badass, muscly muscle car. Loud and proud. But then, take a look at one from 1978. That car sucks. There's no other way to say it. That car just sucks. What about a classic, good old-fashioned Ford Mustang? Beautiful, right? It's as beautiful back then as it is today. But in 1975, it looked like this. So yeah, if you want to own a piece of classic American muscle, your best bet is just to avoid the mid to late 70s altogether. Just save yourself the hassle. Now, unsurprisingly, we're going to talk about another American car on this list of cars you should totally avoid. And we're going to be talking about Michael Scott's favorite drop-top ride, the Chrysler Sebring. And this car can be summed up in pretty much just one word. Sloppy. The craftsmanship. Sloppy. The design. Sloppy. And most importantly, the handling and the ride. Sloppy. No matter which flavor of Sebring you got, the convertible, the coupe, the sedan, the Chrysler Sebring was underpowered and unreliable. And, also just ugly. I mean, you'd have to be basically a bumbling idiot of a middle manager at a paper company to want to really own a Sebring, or to be caught dead in the drop top. Chrysler should have thrown the design of the Sebring in the trash the instant it was presented to them. But unfortunately, they made the car, and now we have to put them in the trash at the junkyard every time they break down. Alright, so now for our last car on this list, we're going to talk about yet another Maserati you should avoid. Which, are there any Maseratis you shouldn't avoid? Let me know down below. And unfortunately, Maserati decided to use the name of one of my favorite animation studios out of Japan for their next car, the Maserati Ghibli. It's kind of incredible that Maserati today still makes the Ghibli. With all their bad quality issues and their unreliability, the Ghibli is one of the most fastest depreciating cars on the planet. Meaning that
there to perform CPR on a kid who was barely breathing and bleeding.
That deadly attack in Toronto. At least 10 people are dead. A majority of the injured victims are women.
Elliot Roger, Howard Slaughter. Every single spoiled, stuck-up, blind slut.
Police calling it premeditated mass murder.
In 2014, Elliot Roger murdered 6 people in a terror attack in California. Prior to the attack, Roger released a video claiming his actions were intended to punish women for not wanting to sleep with him, and men he considered more sexually successful.
22 years old, I'm still a virgin. This is my last video. Tomorrow is the day of retribution.
The following years saw a series of deadly attacks across the US, Canada, and Europe, all perpetrated by young men angry at their lack of sexual fulfillment, with many explicitly citing Roger as an inspiration.
He zigzagged from the street onto the sidewalk, hunting his targets, opened fire, wounding 5, and killing 2 women.
An eyewitness said a lone shooter kicked down the door of a house in southwest England, then continued down the street firing indiscriminately.
What's often been missed, however, is how these sexual anxieties and frustrations feed into right-wing extreme political ideology. Online communities which mix toxic misogyny, conspiracy theory, and fears around sexual inadequacy have become a key recruiting ground for right-wing extremist ideologies. This is why the far right are so weird about sex. Incels are just one branch of a much larger online subculture known as the manosphere, comprised of many different groups, all with one thing in common: the belief that men are the victims of a society set up to favor women.
Within the manosphere, there are different factions and different beliefs. With pickup artists, they believe that they can manipulate women into being romantically interested.
I usually have 3 renditions. One for the girls that are ripe and ready. Those girls, less is more. They're looking at you and say, "Oh, who are you?" You say, "I'm the guy you're kissing now." And you go in.
There are men going their own way who generally refuse to interact, work with women.
I found that you guys are just not extreme enough. You're not going far enough. Men must go our own way. We must separate from the world of women and government.
I think they are all focused on the idea of males losing traction. I think this group of men in particular feels particularly left behind.
What unites all these groups is their virulent misogyny and hatred of feminism. They believe that feminism has ruined modern society by creating a world in which women are supposedly equal agents, thus denying men the dominance they believe is not only natural, but essential for their happiness.
Feminism is seen as something that's eroding the rights of the white man, and so it has allowed both incels and the far right to create an enemy, to create an outgroup, and feminism and women fit relatively neatly into that framing.
I'm now trying to turn this tables of equality on the feminists who have changed this country.
A disgusting communist, anti-Trump, female feminist got a taste of the gender equality that they clamored for at the Women's March. I thought women were so strong. I thought women were so strong and empowered.
Feminism is capitalism. Thank you very much.
This is where the manosphere starts to bleed into the broader conservative movement and becomes a key recruiting ground for the far right.
The internet has created people that may not have otherwise had the opportunity to meet without technology. So we've seen this in other arenas with hate groups and organizations who are recruiting.
Some analysts have suggested that those most likely to join extremist movements are often not the most marginalized in society, but those who feel their positions of relative privilege are under threat. This tallies with an anxiety among some men that their historically dominant role is being eroded, and among white supremacists that the white race is under threat from minority groups.
Birth rates are falling apart, we're losing our nations, we're being flooded with immigrants.
We think of threats in terms of intent and capability. And the nexus where intent and capability meet, that's where you're really in danger. With incels, you always have a high intent. The capability isn't always there. When you have a high intent but not necessarily high capability, that means you have an active threat that you need to be focused on, because if somebody develops that capability, then an attack is pretty much inevitable.
Mass shootings at 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch. At least 49 people are dead, many others seriously wounded.
The gunman moves from room to room, firing his automatic weapon for some 6 minutes, killing at least 41 men, women, and children in the first mosque.
When the white supremacist Brenton Tarrant killed 51 people in Christchurch, New Zealand, he released a self-justifying manifesto. First line, it's the birth rates. This anxiety over so-called racial fertility runs deep in white supremacist movement, often spilling into unhinged conspiracy theories like the so-called Great Replacement.
Thinking about gender roles is absolutely central to thinking about what fascism is and what far-right politics is, because you can't really think race without thinking reproduction.
There's an obvious crossover here with many religious conservatives, men's rights activists, and incel communities. It comes down to controlling women's bodies and insecurities about them choosing other sexual partners.
On the forums, there are many discussions about what women should and shouldn't do, and that they are looking for a woman who will stay at home, raise their children, and be barefoot in the kitchen and cook. But at the same time, they still refer to women using these degrading sexual terms.
Women, their physical fitness and their beauty and perfection and everything that they are expected to do is very much oriented around a passionate and beautiful submission to the joys of motherhood and domesticity, so that they can take on one of the most important roles, the reproduction of the race, the reproduction of the nation.
If you use the term replacement, if you suggest the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world.
But it's not just women's sexual choices that right-wing movements seek to control, but often those of their own members, the Proud Boys. One of the most prominent radical conservative movements in the US discourages its members from masturbating in a policy known as #NoWanks. #NoWanks is pitched as a way of overcoming porn addiction, developing discipline, and giving members more time to focus on their families. But policies like these are more than just a bizarre form of self-help. This is about control.
Having daily practices that connect you to a broader movement is a very effective strategy. So you're not just saying to people, we're being swamped by immigrants, the feminists are in charge. It's saying you need to take action daily in your life and you will see the benefits.
It's now time for the return of men.
The 2010s witnessed the rise of the so-called alt-right, and the pipeline between the manosphere and radical conservative and white supremacist movements went into overdrive.
The online space really is characterized by intermingling between these various factions, and as the factions have intermingled, languages have intermingled, culture has intermingled, jokes have intermingled, and this is partly deliberate, as it makes it much more difficult to draw distinct lines between them, and it means that when an attack happens, it's very difficult to nail down the ideology, and if you can't do that, it's very difficult to nail down the enduring threat.
It's also probably not a coincidence that when one member of the alt-right accuses another of being not committed enough to the cause, the word they use is cuck, a sexual fetish and porn category where men watch their partners have sex with other men.
You are seen as weak, minuscule men. I tell my bold men like you, those aren't men. You understand? You will be weak, minuscule men the rest of your lives, and I'm not going to let you influence the other boys in this community to be little cucks.
This is all a pretty neurotic tangle of sexual insecurity manifesting as political ideology. In Russia, the connection has become explicit, with the emergence of the violent extremist group Male State, who literally call their ideology national patriarchy. They're so violent that they've been officially banned in Russia, though they've still emerged as some of the loudest supporters of Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. This crossover of the manosphere, sexual anxiety, and the far right can lead to very serious violence. In 2018, Scott Bailey murdered 2 women and injured 4 more at a yoga studio in Florida.
This is brand new video from the scene from just moments ago. 2 of those people died. 21-year-old Maura Binkley and 61-year-old Nancy Van Nessum.
I'd like to talk about mongrelization. When I see an interracial couple, I think one of 2 things. Either the guy keep doing better, or we're
in 2021, Lyndon McLeod, a rising star in the manosphere and frequent guest on alt-right podcasts, went on a shooting rampage in Denver, killing 5 people.
Going into a business, holding a gun. Seconds later, he calmly walks out. 3 people were shot and 2 women were killed at that location.
And the list goes on.
5 people of Plymouth who have lost their lives overnight, including a particularly young child.
Again this morning here in the UK, where 6 people have been killed in the worst mass shooting in the country in over a decade.
This all leads to the question. When you see right-wing extremists ranting on YouTube, posing with guns, or marching with tiki torches, are you simply seeing a bunch of scared, sexually insecure men afraid of real contact?
We're, fed a steady diet of particular visions of who we are supposed to be as men, and I think a lot of that kind of that messaging and the sort of problems it creates for society and for young men leads people to start looking for consistent ways of explaining the world.
But none of these things are going to be solved by scapegoating women and immigrants, wallowing in misogyny on the internet, or most of all, by acts of brutal, nihilistic violence.
How is money created? Where does it come from? Who benefits? And what purpose does it serve?
What is the money system? What is the money behind the money system?
For centuries, the mechanics of the monetary system have remained hidden in the prying eyes of the populace. Yet its impact, both on a national and international level, is perhaps unsurpassed. For it is the monetary system that provides the foundation for international dominance and national control.
What are you doing?
Today, as these very foundations are being shaken by crises, the need for open and honest dialogue on the future of the monetary system has never been greater.
This economic crisis is like a cancer. If you just wait and wait thinking this is going to go away, just like a cancer, it's going to grow and it's going to accumulate. What I would say to everybody is, get prepared. This is not a time right now to wishful thinking the government is going to sort things out. The government don't rule the world. Goldman Sachs rules the world. We're on the way to the perfect storm.
In opposition lie corrupt and entrenched interests that lurk in the corridors of power, for whom there are no reasons to relinquish privileges they feel are justly deserved.
Has he got a reform plan for the NHS? No. Has he got a police reform plan? Has he got a plan to cut the deficit?
Do you trust the government?
Try to calm down and behave like an adult, and if you can't, if it's beyond you, leave the chamber, get up,
There's no coincidence that boom and bust started to become a real cyclical issue around about the 1700s when William Paterson founded the Bank of England.
Horrible behaviour as far as the no, it's not funny. Only in your mind is it funny.
Yo, why are you the only one?
It's disgraceful.
The system is inherently unstable as a result of the international power it provides to the dominant party. also at the heart of it lies the idea of, how can I get something for nothing?
Statistical analysis has found that every time an empire begins to near its own demise, you'll find that its currency will be debased.
There is no guide to how this whole system operates. To give you an example, a researcher at the BBC working on the Robert Peston documentary went to the Bank of England and said, "Can you give me a guide to how money is created?" And they just said no.
This documentary will investigate and explain this ever-changing system and the impact it has both on a national and international level. In 2010, the total UK money supply stood at £2.15 trillion. 2.6% of this total was physical cash, 53.5 billion. The rest, 2.1 trillion, or 97.4% of the total money supply, was commercial bank money.
The 3% of money is created through the central bank. And that money, essentially, if you created a £10 note, you could sell that to a bank, put into their ATM, and the bank would have to repay that £10